You're listening to the High Vibe Lounge podcast. I'm your host, Indigo Colton, and this show is meant to inspire, empower, uplift, and pique your curiosity about everything metaphysics and business. Let's get into the show. Today's episode is sponsored by HoneyBook. This is my favorite client management platform, and it is specifically built for creatives. So if you are looking for a super wonderful, streamlined place to manage all of your clients, to organize all your communication, to build out your contracts, your invoices, your proposals, to have automated workflows that mean that you don't have to be doing all the heavy lifting yourself, and so much more, then HoneyBook is definitely the platform for you. I am part of their educator program, and that means that when you click the link in the show notes of this episode, you will be able to get a 14-day free trial and save 50% off of your subscription. Today, I'm so excited to be talking with a dear friend of mine, Maggie Miller, who is someone that I've really gotten to know over the past year here in Austin, where we both live. So I am really excited to bring her onto the show to talk with her about self-care, about business, and really just dive into all of these topics. And with that, let's get into the interview. Well, thank you so much for being here, Maggie.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I know that we've known each other for a little bit over a year now, but I would love it if you could just introduce yourself, tell our listeners who you are and what you do.
Yeah, of course. I'm Maggie Gentry Miller, and I have a business called Maggie Gentry, where I provide thought partnership and marketing strategy for creative entrepreneurs. The kind of work that I do and the philosophy that I believe is something called Own Your Why. And so that's this program that I work through with all of my clients. And it's really about understanding what it is at the core of your business, why you do what you do. And then from there, building a business and a marketing strategy around that core value. So that's what I do on a day-to-day basis. I'm also co-founder of a self-care event series here in Austin, Texas called Mindful Moments. So we may chat about that a little bit. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
And I also want to share for everyone listening that Maggie actually helped me go through that whole process with the Moons Within. So I just want to shout you out because you were super integral to really bringing this to life.
It was one of my most favorite projects. It was so fun to work with you, Indigo.
Thank you. I love that. This whole project has been a dream. And I'm so excited to bring you on now to the podcast as we're continuing to evolve and just try out new things.
Yeah, that's what you got to do.
So I'd love to actually kick off with Mindful Moments because I know, and I've worked with you through Maggie Gentry, but I'd love to hear more kind of like how your self-care event series started, what you guys do, like just share everything with us.
Yeah, of course. So I co-founded it with my partner, Mandy Milliken, and she is an event planner and producer here in Austin, as well as a yoga instructor. And one of the things that she does is she also provides wedding day yoga. So she's predominantly a wedding planner. But we have known each other tangentially through the years and then reconnected about a year ago. It was early 2017 when she was going through the Own Your Why course. And through these discussions, she was talking about how she wanted to try and find another way to bring yoga to more people outside of the yoga studio.
Right.
And I was really starting to explore my own self-care journey a lot, and that I had recently gotten my own tarot deck, so I was exploring that a lot. I was really getting serious at my gratitude journal and spending some time with that every day. And it was kind of through this process and through these discussions that we came up with this idea of, well, what if there's a way that we could bring various aspects of self-care to people, to the normal kind of busy creative woman. And the real impetus there was, I think that it can be really intimidating if you are curious about exploring something new, but it can be a financial commitment. It can be really scary if you're walking into, for instance, a yoga studio for the first time. You don't know if you're going to go in and everyone's like on their heads and you're like, I can barely touch my toes. So we wanted to try to create the safe space and the safe community for you to explore these different healing art modalities without you feeling like, I don't know what I'm doing here. So we wanted to, with mindful moments, hopefully create this space where that sense of dread can wash away. And so that you're stepping into this safe environment, this comforting, welcoming environment. So with that, we do events every other month, and almost all of them to date have started with yoga of some kind. And so with that, Mandy will lead us in that. And then the second half is bringing in a different healing arts practitioner to teach us a little bit more about what they do. So we've done some on just life coaching in general. We've done some on essential oils, on self-massage, on intention setting, moon phases, and how you can sync up with your life. Yeah, so that's kind of how it started and what we've been trying to do. And it's been great so far. It's been really great. So now we're kind of thinking, how can we bring it outside of Austin, but trying to do it in a really meaningful way that also doesn't deplete us from our own energy, because we both run our own full-time jobs.
Right. Yeah. You want to service the people in your community, but not at the expense of your own self-care.
Exactly. And having these conversations and meeting these women and being in community with them is something that really lights both of us up. And also, I think being a connector, and that, if you're curious about exploring this and this, this particular modality, or you're really interested in learning about, song healing or whatever, then we can bring somebody in. And that way, maybe you feel a little bit more comfortable than reaching out and going a little bit deeper with that person. So
when you're talking about self-care, because I know, like, for me, when I started kind of exploring that, and maybe for you as well, and probably for people listening, we tend to think of it as like, we're going to buy ourselves fresh flowers, we're going to have a bubble bath and a massage, that's great. And I think that's a really great place to start. But it sounds like you're going into like a deeper form of self-care, as opposed to, I don't know if deeper is the right word, but less of like the bubble bath, the more of connecting with a different part of yourself.
Yeah, that's a really great observation. And I think you're right. I think you're spot on there. I think that there's something more to the superficial, if I can say that. And I don't mean that I mean that on like purely a surface level basis. So if you're thinking about self-care as like bubble baths or massages, it's like predominantly physical. I mean, granted, those activities can also relax you. So you have some sort of like mental release or maybe an emotional release as well. It's kind of funny. I was talking to a friend and we were saying how it's interesting. Everyone's talking about, bring like the joy back into your life, or everyone focuses on the really positive aspects, the happy, the joyful. And yes, I mean, we all want to live in a space where we feel these really positive emotions, but I also think it's really, you're doing yourself a disservice if you're only looking for that, because I think that that's half of the human experience. The other half are those kind of deeper, sometimes darker emotions and that sort of like shadow self side. And not to say that we need to wallow in the pain, but I think to feel the pain is a very real part of the full holistic human experience. So yeah, I think for me with self-care, I mean, maybe this is jumping ahead, but when I started my business, which was March of 2016, when I had my like start date, the first thing I did was call a therapist because I was like, I know that I'm going to need some serious support as I go through this. And I'd never worked with one before, but I just I knew that I was going to go through a lot of self-doubt, a lot of fear. And I wanted to have someone outside of my partner that I could really rely on and have this kind of third party to help me get through
Right.
that transition. So, yeah, I mean, I think with starting my business was really when I started that journey, but it was always from this place of self-care support, like rather than self-care as bubble baths.
Right. I think that's so interesting because I don't actually, I know a lot of people, like myself included, who we start our own businesses. We go through these things, and then, like, a year, two, three down the line, we're like, oh crap, I need someone to talk to. But I think that's so fascinating that you started and knew, like, you were in touch enough with yourself to know, like, this person's going to be key for me to move forward.
Yeah, and I think I recognized hmm, I recognized that it was going to be a major life transition
Mhm.
on a number of different fronts. And I ultimately didn't want to put the strain of starting a new business on my marriage.
Yeah.
Um, Knowing that with him being the kind of like front line of defense and him being there every day, he would be the person that would get the brunt of it.
Right.
And so I wanted to have tools that helped me filter and helped me to, yeah, just have a better understanding of my own thoughts and feelings and emotions and kind of working through that before I brought it to him. And also because, I want him to be my partner first and foremost. And there are other things that involves versus, me just going through all of my like new business woes with him. So,
But that, I love that. And I mean, I'm not married, but I can understand how that would be really beneficial. Because even I feel like with friends, there are business friends who get it. And then there are other friends who they're not business owners and they're curious. And sometimes I feel like we can have a conversation that's really positive, like, here's what's going on, and I can explain it to you. And then sometimes if we're caught up in something and we're really emotional and they're like, hey, how'd that thing go? And then we just like unload on them and they don't understand like what we're talking about or what we're really going through, but they're there.
totally.
I think that's so, and that to me feels like a really radically different form of self-care than the bubble baths. And I'm not trying to say that the bubble baths aren't good, because they're amazing.
Yeah, I
But
love me a
it,
bubble bath.
but it's just I think such a different but really good way to look at it is it's just taking care of yourself on every front,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that
Mm-hmm.
part for you sounds like is very like emotionally healing to have that person. And so you're taking it's self-care for like your minds and your emotions.
Yeah. I I went to I guess this was just a couple months after I started, and it was my first like women's wellness circle, and it was at a yoga studio, and it was um, led by two women, the owner of the yoga studio and a life coach. And it was there that the first time I was introduced to the idea of self-care being this four-pronged holistic approach, and that it has to include physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual aspects. And once I was introduced to that, then that kind of illuminated so much more of what I needed to focus on in terms of how I'm taking care of myself. Because a lot of the physical, I mean, we both are friends with Amy Koretsky, and she says that, a lot of self care is often health care on
Yeah.
the physical level too, as far as eating right and moving your body and getting sleep and all of those things. But I think it's also exploring this like totality of it, as far as how am I intellectually stimulating myself, and how am I learning and growing, and how am I exploring this idea of connected to magic or source or the universe or God or whoever that may be, or whatever that may be.
So when you're, and as I think we said before we press record on this episode, that you're coming up on 2 years in your business, which, first
Mhm.
of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
That's amazing. But I'd love to know, just kind of from when you started, when you went to that women's event, and you've started exploring your self-care, looking at these 4 different things, like what does that look for you now, being 2 years into your business journey?
hmm Well, looking at the four, let's see. So if I start with physical, for me, my forms of movement that I most prefer are yoga and walking.
Mhm.
So I make it a point to go to yoga as much as I can. I like to do at least 3 times a week if possible. And then on days when I'm not going to yoga, then I'll go on walks. So it's been I have a trail around my neighborhood here that's about 2 miles, which is a really beautiful break in the middle of the day. Or also going to meet people, friends early in the morning to go around Town Lake has been fun here in Austin.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And then yeah, I mean, we just my partner and I, we just did Whole 30. So that's been interesting, just exploring again, because I also have a gluten allergy and I've had that for about 10 years, but redoing this process of what are triggering foods for me. So that has been an interesting exploration recently. So staying hydrated, I've reduced my caffeine intake significantly, which has helped my sleep. I'm typically in bed by 9 p.m. most days, and I'm reading and asleep by 10. But then I'm up at 6 a.m. So that's more of like the physical, I would say.
Mhm.
As far as mental, I am really trying to watch TV less and read more. So it's been really helpful for a nighttime routine to kind of unplug. I keep my phone in the bathroom so it's not by me in the bed, which also is a great alarm clock because I have to get up to go get it.
That is so smart. Like,
It's been a game changer on both fronts. Like for me, going to bed better, and then also not being a chronic snoozer, because I
right.
was so bad about that.
Yeah, if it's by your bed, you just like, because I do this all the time.
Yeah,
I just like, it comes on, I'm like, oh no, I'm still sleeping. Like, go away. But if it's in your bathroom, like you have to physically get up and walk. And then I feel like once you're up, then it's like, well, I'm up. Like I might as well just start my day.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, yeah, I've been reading a lot more. And I think also being connected in community has been really helpful for my mental state, in
Mhm.
terms of just being able to have, like you were saying, you know, friends and allies who kind of understand where you're going, what you're going through. Um, and then reading not only just, nonfiction for business and to explore that, or any sort of spiritual text, but also fiction has been really fun for me. And I'm getting my yoga teacher certification, so I'm excited to explore that, which that's really will be physical, mental, I'm sure emotional, and then spiritual too. So that's kind of encompassing. Yeah. And then with emotional, I mean, I work with an emotional wellness coach, Barbara from Be With Cards. And she's helped me tremendously in understanding that my emotions and feelings are signs and signal posts for me to understand what's really going on. Um, and so that's been profoundly helpful, to have a better vocabulary about what's going on in my
Yeah.
body and mind. And then spiritual, I mean, I've been exploring more with the tarot, which has been interesting, and just trying to be a little bit more open to a connectedness with nature,
Mhm.
understanding a little bit more with the moon and its phases, um, and how that works with. me astrology a little bit. I'm just kind of in this very curious, like exploratory phase. So,
Yeah. That I feel like that would make it fun. Right.
yeah.
Let's try out a little bit here, a little bit there, see what you like and what resonates, and then keep doing that until you find more and more things.
Yeah, I feel like I'm just a sponge at this stage of just doing my best to collect as much information and remain open.
I feel like that's such a well rounded self care sort of, I wouldn't necessarily, I don't know if regimen is the best word, but it's like you have this whole plan for all of these different parts. And I think for everyone listening, that is going to be really beneficial because I feel like, I know for me, it's been a struggle to where it's like someone is like, oh, like go do this. For
Mm.
example, like mindset journaling is something that like I feel like so many people I follow online, they talk about, and then I'm like, well, great. Like, what do I do? Like go do self-care. Like, what do I do? But I think this gives people a great sort of jumping off points. Be like, oh, I want to try like unplugging at night, or like I know I'm going to do tonight, like put my phone in the bathroom and see what that does to my sleeping.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's also, I mean, going back to what we really believe with mindful moments is that
Mhm.
everybody's self care routine or regimen or practice looks completely different.
Yeah.
And so, with that, it's, I think the most important thing is just being curious to learn about different things so that you can really understand for yourself, do I like this, did I not like this, did this feel rejuvenating, did it not? And and I think another big thing that has been interesting is just also understanding truly the cyclical nature of
Mhm.
things, and understanding that when there's a challenge or an obstacle, that's not the end of the road. It's
Right.
just a speed hump that I have to like slowly turtle myself over. So that's been helpful too.
Yeah. So it's giving yourself permission for it to look different than anybody else's practice.
Hmm. And I feel really strongly about my morning routine, but there are some days where I'm like, nope, I need to sleep. And so I don't beat myself up about it.
I feel like that too is so, it can be challenging, but it's also much less stressful, right? If we give ourselves permission to just go with the flow,
Hmm.
right? Like we have this routine or we have this thing and we're going to do it 90% of the time. But the other time, if it doesn't feel right, like then it doesn't feel right. And you just move on to the next thing and don't get
Yeah.
stuck in like, I should do this. I had to do it. Like all of that whole mental game that just spirals.
Well, I mean, case in point with me this week. So I have no idea why, but Sunday night I had severe insomnia. I woke up at like 2 a.m. and was completely awake and had all these ideas. And so I allowed myself to just like journal it out. I looked up, it was like 2 hours had passed and it was like
Oh,
4
wow.
a.m. And so then yesterday I had all these ideas of what I wanted to do. Mondays are my day. So I don't book client meetings so that I can get all of my own work done. Um, and typically I'm really quite productive, but I was still so tired from not getting sleep that I think it was like 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And I was just like, I'm done. And so I think past Maggie would have felt a lot of guilt for doing
Mhm.
that, of, oh, I should be working, it's a Monday afternoon, I need to be doing all these things, oh, I have this deadline that I have to meet that is just for me and no one else like really knows or is going to care. And it's like, well, if it happens on Tuesday instead of Monday, it'll be fine. you
Yeah.
know but that feels crazy, like for me, because historically I think I've just been so type A, so regimented, so disciplined,
Mhm.
that for me to give myself that permission feels so freeing and so new. I'm like, oh, I can do this. I can give myself a break and it's all going to be okay.
How does how does that play out with like your family or your partner or your friends who say knew you before either your business or you've I would say become more compassionate towards yourself in this regard and like
Mhm.
not feeling the guilt, how do they expect you to still be the same, or are they open to you being more sort of aligned with flowing where your energy wants to take you?
Such a great question, Indigo. It's been interesting. So a lot of the work that I've been doing with my therapist and with my coaches is in establishing those boundaries and also protecting myself and my own energy. And so, I mean, with my partner, he's been really fantastic. He really gets it. And he's recently, I guess it'll coming up on a year now, he's been going to a therapist himself. And I think that now that we have a shared vocabulary, it makes things a whole lot easier to have very honest conversations. It wasn't always the case, but I feel really good about where that is. And I feel very grateful that it seems like we're growing each individually, but also in the same direction collectively. So that feels like a really cool win. I cannot say the same for some of my family members. Um, and that's something that I'm continuously trying to work on. But historically, what has happened is as I've been trying to assert myself more and as I have been trying to establish these boundaries, the response has been a complete shutdown. So that is really difficult in trying to navigate that. I mean, it's taken me a while, but I've had, again, very honest conversations about where I'm at, what I hope for our relationship, what I would love to see them do, and so that they can understand how their actions are impacting me. But the thing that I have to realize is I can't control their reactions. And that's been the hardest part. So even though I feel like I'm doing all the things that I need to do for myself, the needle still hasn't moved.
And it sucks. And I can 100% relate to to what that feeling is.
Yeah.
I agree. I feel like we can set our boundaries, right? We can do all this work for ourselves and do it internally. But I feel like it gets easier, just speaking for myself, to become more compassionate, saying like, oh, like, right, I'm going to stop working at 1, or I'm going to do things this way and not feel that guilt. But it's much, much harder to untangle and to have that same compassion for like this person in my life. Like, this is how they're going to react. And like, that's not a reflection on me.
Yeah.
That's all of their stuff.
Yeah. But that, I mean, I'm still not fully in the clear with that.
Yeah. I feel like that work, just with the relationships and with other people, I feel like that work takes longer because it's more than just us, right? It's more than just us working with ourselves,
Yeah.
for ourselves.
Yeah. No, you're spot on. Yeah, and I mean, I think that for me right now, in terms of where I'm at with that relationship and where I am with me right now, um, is that I have to continue to do what is best for me. I have to continue to try and live by the example that I hope, the biggest thing for me is releasing expectations. And so I think that, it's like you have this talk or you do this thing and you think things will change in one way or the other. And so for me right now, a big part of what I'm trying to do is keep doing what I have been doing and doing what I feel in my heart is best for me. And maybe one day they'll come around. I don't know.
Yeah.
Not clinging too closely to any particular result.
So when you're thinking about non-attaching, and I know we're talking about it with people and with their reactions and all of that, but does any of that And the work that you're doing, right, in your personal life with those relationships, does that translate to how you're running your business as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think the short answer is yes.
Mhm.
Um, and and why I think so is if we're operating from this space, and I say yes, and maybe this is an ideal yes. I'm hoping to get to that place. I feel like I'm likely better at it in with my business than in my life right now.
Mhm.
But ideally, so if we start with the business side of things, and where my hope is to help people find this like really deep purpose for why they're doing what they're doing. And the part of owning your why is really about how are you ensuring that whatever business decision you make, that it is supported by this why of
Mhm.
yours, this core value. And so, with that, I think that with the peaks and valleys of a business, there can be some really high highs and some very low lows. And I think that to keep you somewhat in that equilibrium is always coming back to that center place, always
Mhm.
coming back to um, your why, making sure that that is the end goal. So as long as whatever you're doing is perpetuating that message, then I think you're on track. And I think it can be a little bit easier. Maybe that's the wrong word. I think it can be maybe comforting if you have that true north, that guidepost that you can use and say, okay, I'm in this like really high point and I want to ride this momentum. What do I do next? And if
Mhm.
you do something that is a complete left turn away from your center, away from your why, then you could fall hard. Um, and then conversely, if you're in this really low place, I think that if you can say, okay, instead of doing something drastic or instead of reacting really quickly, what can you do that can help you get back to that midpoint? So yeah, I mean, I think in life, you can use the same analogy, I believe, as, what is your why, your core purpose of who you are and how you want to live your life. But I think that I do think it's harder because it just feels a lot more personal, even if you are building a personal brand like I am. But there's like an LLC filter or something that makes it.
Right. Yeah, but your life is, it's your life, right? It's
Yeah.
you and all of that. It's not, right? There's no separation of
Hmm.
like, this is me and this is me as like my business persona or like
Hmm.
my brands that I'm projecting. Like your life is all, it's all you all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. And I think I'm like, how do you know, I want to try to say something about this idea of, I mean, specifically, so we're recording this in January where we're coming off of the New Year stuff and it's like new year, new you, and which I don't really buy into, um, but even just thinking about in life, if finding a why for your life doesn't feel like that's resonating, I think that maybe it's more of, like, what do you want your legacy to be? Or even thinking about, how do I want to be perceived when I'm not in the room? Or how do I want people to talk about me when I'm not there? If you can think about the words that you would want people to use to describe you, then I think that that can be a way to inform the actions that you take. So if you really want to be known as generous, then how can you be more giving? If you really want to be known as kind, then what can you do to make sure that, you're infusing everything with kindness? So
Yeah, but that's so simple and it's so obvious, right? But yeah, it's, I feel like it's something that like we don't think about that often. Like how, what we want to be known for. Or I love the word when you said legacy. It's like, yes, I love that. But how we want that to be, like how we want to show up, it's directly informed by what we do. But if we
mhm,
never stop to think about how we want to show up or how we want to be perceived or how we want people to feel when
mhm.
they're with us, then we're never going to consciously take the actions that are going to actually lead to that.
Yeah. And I believe it's a culmination of your actions that shows what it is that you truly believe.
Mm.
So if you want to live a life that proclaims that you believe one thing or another, then I think it is very important that you back that up with the day to day, what you actually do, how you actually interact.
Is the phrase that just popped into my mind, which may not be the accurate quote, but it's like you don't, like, you climb a mountain with like individual steps. That's totally not the quote as I'm saying it. I know that's not, but it's the same thing, right? We look and we're like, oh, I want to get here, I want to do that, and we look at the big thing. But really, when it comes down to it, it's like, okay, we're putting our phone in the bathroom. I'm going to keep coming back to that because that's so good. Like, we're going to put our phone in the bathroom. We're going to unplug the TV. We're going to go for walks or like go to yoga. And that's going to get us to this big mountain. Like, we're going to cross the finish line, but it's not going to feel like this. I mean, it'll probably feel like a huge thing, but it's also very grounded in what we're actually doing every single day.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in another example, so the dude was gone all weekend. And so I had a weekend by myself. And like sometimes in past, Maggie would absolutely just spend hours like binging on something on Netflix. But I know that that is not truly restorative for me. But at the same time, it felt like a splurge because I haven't been watching as much TV. So I found a new show on Netflix. It's called Morocco, but it's in Spanish. And so because, I would be watching, I'm using air quotes, watching a show while like scrolling Instagram or something, which is absurd, but I'm guilty. But having to watch something where I'm reading subtitles forces me to solely focus on that one activity. And so, it's been kind of fun. It's been fun for me. And because it's like after an hour, I'm like, I'm done. I don't want to watch another one. So it's moderating my TV intake. I'm using it as like a fun little splurge of a, hour, but without it getting excessive. So anyway, it's just like, what's your phone in the bathroom, or what are your like Spanish TV shows to help like, get you through? We're real philosophical here.
I know. I'm going to write that question down. Why is your phone in the bathroom? That's a good journaling prompt. Figure it out. Sit down. But I love that because you're taking something that in the past didn't nourish you, or it wasn't, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to say like not an active form of self-care.
Oh, 100%. It was a numbing activity for sure.
Yeah, but you're taking it because you still like it, but you're rearranging it. So it is something that actually is self-care. Like, you're actually replenishing yourself while still, like you're saying, like indulging in this activity, but then it doesn't become this, like this ego driven, I'm comfortable, I'm going to sit here. And like something that I've totally done before is like watch an entire season of a show and not sleep. Like,
oh yeah. Totally. Yeah. And I mean, I think that, and that's kind of maybe going back to what we even started with too, is just exploring, what are these things that don't really feel supportive for you, whatever that may be, and how are there like small tweaks that you can make. It doesn't mean that you have to book a massage every month, although that sounds amazing. And so it doesn't always have to be something that's spending money or spending a lot of time or anything like that. It can be kind of these like small alterations.
Yeah, I love that. If you could talk to yourself at the beginning of this journey, being where you are now, what would you say to past Maggie?
At the start of my self-care journey?
Or whatever start point feels at some point in your past, whatever feels best for you.
Gosh, that's such a great question. But honestly, knowing myself, even if I had a message to give her, I'm not entirely sure she would listen, because I really think that I had to learn all of these lessons in time and when I was ready. And so I think for me, things don't sink in until I think I have to be almost like beat over the head with like hearing it so often. And it's like I intrinsically know these things, and I hear them and I read them and I listen to them and I know them, but I still can't implement it into my life until there's something that just, it's like this, something clicks. I mean, even quite recently, talking about working in flow, I've been thinking about it and studying about it and writing about it and trying to implement it. And I really don't think it's been until this past year, like the past few weeks, that I've been able to really embody that. So maybe what I would say is, and I mentioned this before, but even just to be like, stay open and be curious and be grateful too. Gosh, I mean, I think just being open to gratitude has been a huge help for me in terms of just shifting the perspective. Whenever I'm in a full-on pity party, if I can just like sit down and write a few things that I'm grateful for, it quickly shifts my perspective.
It's so powerful.
Yeah.
And so good.
Yeah.
And there you have it. Thank you so much, Maggie, for being on the show this week. You can connect with Maggie over on Instagram at Maggie Gentry with an underscore. So it's Maggie Gentry _. And you can also connect with her through the Mindful Moments over on Instagram. And you can find them over at Mindful Moments ATX. And there you have it. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the High Vibe Lounge podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, there's nothing that would make me happier than if you would leave us a rating and review on iTunes. And make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts to make sure that you never miss an upcoming episode. And if you're looking for show notes and resources that were mentioned in this episode, you can go to indigocolton.com/podcast. And I will see you in the next episode. Have a great day.